Maybe next time you'll remember your place." Victoria's smile didn't falter as the paint water splashed down Gracie's dress, pastel pink dripping over gray fabric like humiliation turned art. The crowd laughed softly, pretending it was nothing. But one child saw, one man saw, and the moment her quiet grace met his silent fury, something irreversible began to burn. Before sunrise, Charleston's favorite couple would become its biggest scandal, and the woman they tried to shame would rise higher than them all. Stay with us, because what begins as humiliation ends in truth. A nanny dismissed like she was invisible, a fiancé who mistook cruelty for class, and a man who finally saw the difference. Tonight, we're not just telling a love story. We're witnessing a line being crossed, and a choice that changed everything. The Charleston sun melted into the horizon, painting the young estate in liquid gold. The mansion sat on the hill like a relic of another age, white columns gleaming, magnolia trees swaying in slow applause. A string quartet played softly beneath the veranda, their notes curling through the warm air like silk. Guests in pastel and pearls drifted across the lawn, their laughter practiced, their smiles rehearsed. Inside, everything gleamed. Silver trays, marble floors, chandeliers that caught every flicker of ambition in the room. It was a world built on legacy and expectation, and tonight, Julian Young stood at the center of it. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Have you ever watched someone try to break your dignity and found power in staying calm instead? He looked every inch the heir to a quiet empire, tall, composed, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. His tuxedo fit him like a second skin, but his expression carried a weight the tailoring couldn't smooth away. To everyone else, tonight marked the perfect alignment of love and lineage. To Julian, it felt like standing at the edge of a decision he hadn't quite made. He raised his glass as yet another family friend toasted the future Mr. and Mrs. Young, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Across the room, Victoria Carlisle shimmered beneath the crystal light. Her beauty was deliberate, every hair in place, every gesture a choreography of control. She was bred for moments like this, the darling of Charleston society, the daughter of an old political family whose influence stretched from city halls to boardrooms. When she spoke, people leaned in. When she entered a room, silence followed. Her diamond ring caught the chandelier's glow like a tiny sun. To anyone watching, she was the picture of refinement. But to Julian, she sometimes felt like a mirror, polished, cold, and impossibly hard to see through. Upstairs, away from the champagne and murmurs of wealth, Gracie Harris hummed softly as she folded a child's blanket. Her voice was low, lilting, the kind that calmed storms. The small bedroom smelled of lavender and bedtime lotion, a sanctuary untouched by the noise below. The little girl, Julian's niece, Rosie, clutched her stuffed bear and smiled drowsily as Gracie brushed a curl from her cheek. In the soft light, Gracie's brown skin glowed like bronze silk, her features serene but alert, as though life had taught her to expect the unexpected. She whispered, "Good night, baby," and turned off the lamp, unaware that the laughter floating up from the grand hall below carried the sound of her destiny approaching, wrapped in champagne, pride, and a woman who believed grace was something only money could buy. Morning light poured through the gauzy curtains of the nursery, painting soft gold across the quilt where Rosie slept. Gracie Harris sat at the edge of the bed, a book still open in her hands, her voice tapering into a whisper. Even after the story ended, she lingered, watching the child's tiny chest rise and fall. In that rhythm, Gracie found something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Her world had been a patchwork of motion and endurance, shifts at hospitals, nights tutoring, long hours that blurred one into the next. But here, inside the young mansion, she'd found stillness. Not luxury, not comfort, just purpose. She rose quietly, smoothing the blanket, her reflection caught in the mirror across the room. Her hair, pulled into a curly updo, framed a face both youthful and steady. The kind of face that had learned early how to listen before speaking. Her skin, deep and warm-toned, gleamed faintly in the morning light. There was beauty there, though Gracie never named it. She had no time for vanity. Her beauty came through her patience, the way she spoke to the gardener by name, the way she remembered how Rosie liked her milk just warm enough, or how she paused to pick wildflowers for the girl's bedside vase. Downstairs, silverware clinked against porcelain as preparations for the day began again. Gracie could already hear Victoria Carlisle's clipped voice echoing faintly from the drawing room, polite but sharp, like crystal ready to crack. Victoria was all angles, every movement deliberate, every tone rehearsed. Gracie never envied her. She pitied her a little. There was a hollowness to people who needed the world to bow just to feel seen. Still, Gracie knew her place. She moved through the house with soft footsteps, folding laundry, answering the occasional question from the staff, her posture straight, her eyes kind. No task was beneath her, though some guests treated her as if she barely existed. It didn't bother her. Not anymore. She had built a shield of grace so strong that even cruelty slid off it like rain. When Julian passed her in the hallway that morning, he paused briefly. "You make this house feel like home," he said simply before continuing toward the study. She smiled faintly after him, the compliment unexpected, the warmth genuine. For a brief moment, her heart stilled. She wasn't sure what it meant, or if it meant anything at all. But as she turned back to her duties, she couldn't shake the quiet sense that change had already stepped through the door and its footsteps were drawing closer. The mansion came alive beneath 1,000 points of light. Music spilled through open French doors, blending with the low hum of laughter and the pop of champagne corks. Outside, magnolia trees swayed gently in the summer air, while inside, every crystal and glass gleamed as if trying to impress. The young estate had hosted many evenings of power and privilege, but tonight shimmered with particular significance. This was not just a celebration. It was a coronation of sorts, the merging of two legacies. Victoria Carlisle moved through it like she was born to, her emerald gown catching the chandelier's glow with every step. She smiled for the cameras, her hand resting delicately on Julian's arm, her laugh melodic and hollow all at once. Julian played the part expected of him, attentive, charming, composed. Yet beneath the polished exterior, there was a flicker of detachment. He nodded through endless congratulations, though each one felt like a chain tightening around his neck. "You've done well, Julian," someone whispered, as if marriage were a business acquisition. He smiled faintly, but his eyes drifted toward the staircase, and paused. Gracie stood there, halfway between the kitchen and the grand hall, still in her soft gray uniform. She wasn't meant to be part of the evening, but when the child's laughter echoed from upstairs, she'd come to settle Rosie back to bed. Now, caught in the golden light of the chandeliers, she looked out of place and yet strangely grounded, like the only real thing in a room full of performance. Her hair framed her face in soft curls, and her gaze moved quietly across the crowd, not envious, not afraid, simply observant. It was that calm that caught Victoria's eye. Her smile faltered for the briefest moment, her champagne glass hovering mid-air. In that single glance, she saw something she didn't understand: composure without pedigree, dignity without wealth. And it unnerved her. She leaned toward a friend and murmured something that made them both laugh, though her eyes never left Gracie. A waiter brushed past, and Gracie reached out instinctively to steady his tray before it tipped. The motion drew a few glances, a soft ripple of acknowledgement she didn't seek. She smiled politely, retreating toward the edge of the hall. But as she turned, she felt it, the sting of judgment, invisible yet sharp. Victoria's gaze followed her like a verdict, her lips curving into a poised, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. And for the first time that night, amid the glitter and champagne, something colder began to hum beneath the music, the quiet prelude of a storm no one yet saw coming. The string quartet drifted into another slow, elegant waltz as servers glided between tables, their trays heavy with champagne and oysters. The air smelled of roses and old money. Victoria Carlisle stood near the base of the grand staircase, her smile as polished as the silver she never touched. She thrived in settings like this, where every glance was a transaction, every compliment an investment. When her eyes found Gracie across the room, that composure thinned. The nanny's presence, simple uniform, calm expression, felt like a crack in the perfection she'd so carefully orchestrated. It wasn't that Gracie had done anything wrong, it was that she was there. Victoria approached with deliberate grace, her heels clicking softly against the marble. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" she began, her tone honeyed, almost kind. The guests nearby turned their attention half toward her, half toward the spectacle she was about to stage. "But next time," she added lightly, her lips curving in that signature photogenic smile, "you can take the staff entrance. We wouldn't want you getting caught up in the crowd." The words floated like silk, wrapped in civility, but sharp enough to draw blood. For a heartbeat, silence lingered. Gracie's fingers tightened around the edge of the tray she was carrying. Her posture didn't falter, her chin stayed level, but inside her chest, something clenched, a familiar ache she thought she'd learned to ignore. She lowered her gaze slightly, her voice soft but clear. "Of course, ma'am," she said. The syllables were careful, deliberate, respectful. But when her eyes lifted again, the calm behind them was unshaken. And that, more than anything, unsettled Victoria. A guest nearby shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check his watch. Another coughed. The insult had been subtle, but not invisible. Julian saw the exchange from across the room, the shift in energy as tangible as heat. He'd seen Victoria be dismissive before, waiters, drivers, assistants, but this was different. This was cruelty disguised as decorum. Victoria turned slightly, her perfume trailing behind her like the aftermath of a storm. "Enjoy the evening," she added, almost as an afterthought, before rejoining a group of women who were already whispering. Gracie exhaled slowly, setting the tray down on a passing cart. For a moment, she stood still amid the noise, the music, the laughter, the crystal clinking, and felt the weight of being seen only when someone wanted to remind her of her place. But she didn't let it linger. She straightened her uniform, lifted her chin, and continued walking, her grace louder than any apology Victoria would never offer. The hum of the party dulled to a distant echo behind the kitchen doors. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and simmering sauce, the sharp rhythm of knives hitting cutting boards punctuating the tension. Gracie stood by the service counter, untying her apron with careful movements, her composure steady, though her heart still carried the sting of humiliation. Chef Antonio glanced up from his station, his eyes narrowing. "That fiancée of his?" he muttered under his breath. "Trouble in couture." The corners of Gracie's mouth lifted, a faint, weary smile. "I've met her kind before," she said softly. "They always need someone to feel smaller so they can feel tall." She reached for a fresh towel, wiping her hands as she stared at the reflection in the chrome door ahead, the calm face she'd learned to wear when the world demanded she shrink. But before she could retreat into silence, the kitchen door swung open. Julian stepped in, the contrast between his black tuxedo and the dim, humming space almost startling. He looked out of place there, too pristine for the heat and the clang of reality, but his expression wasn't one of superiority. It was concern. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," he said quietly, his voice lowering as though afraid to break something fragile. Gracie turned, her brow softening. "I'm fine, sir. These things happen." Her tone was polite, controlled, but he saw the flicker of truth beneath it, the fatigue, the restraint. "They shouldn't," he said. For a moment their eyes met, the distance between privilege and dignity suspended. "You've done more for Rosie than anyone else since my sister passed," he continued, his voice gentler now. "You've given her back her laughter. I don't say it enough, but thank you for that." Gracie hesitated, not used to being acknowledged so openly. "She's a good child," she said softly. "She just needed someone to remember her mother loved her." The words seemed to settle in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither dared touch. Julian nodded slowly, a quiet exhale escaping him. "Still," he said, "I'm grateful." When he turned to leave, she caught the faintest trace of something unspoken. Respect, maybe, or understanding. It lingered after he stepped through the door, like the warmth of sunlight fading. But they weren't alone. From the narrow slit of the doorway leading to the corridor, Victoria watched, her expression cool and calculating. The smile she wore for the world was gone. In its place was something sharper, suspicion blooming quietly, beautifully like poison. The afternoon sun poured across the garden, turning the stone path into ribbons of light. Rosie knelt on the patio with a box of chalk, her small hands dusted in color. Gracie sat beside her, knees tucked beneath her long skirt, sketching lazy hearts and crooked suns that made the little girl giggle. It was a picture of innocence, two souls at peace in a world that had forgotten how. The magnolia trees whispered in the breeze, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the house beyond them didn't exist. But it did. And Victoria Carlisle stood on the terrace steps, her eyes narrowing at the sight before her. To her, the scene was wrong, too comfortable, too familiar. The nanny laughing with the child, sunlight warming her face as if she belonged there. It wasn't malice that stirred in Victoria first. It was envy. The kind that grows in silence, rooted in insecurity and fear. She smoothed her silk blouse, lifted her chin, and crossed the lawn with the grace of a woman born to command. "Enjoying yourself?" she asked, her tone deceptively light. Gracie looked up, startled but smiling. "Just keeping her busy before lunch, ma'am." Rosie turned, proudly holding up her drawing. "Look, Gracie helped me make a rainbow." Victoria's smile tightened. "That's lovely, darling," she said. Then her gaze shifted back to Gracie, colder now. "You seem very comfortable out here, almost like family." Gracie felt the sting beneath the sweetness, but refused to flinch. "Rosie just needed some company," she replied evenly. "She misses her mother." The words hung heavy, a quiet truth that pierced through Victoria's veneer. "And what exactly gives you the right to say that?" Victoria snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. Rosie froze, eyes wide. Gracie straightened her posture, calm as ever. "Nothing gives me the right, ma'am," she said softly. "But someone should remember her." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, with a flicker of disdain, Victoria reached for the cup beside the easel, a jar of paint water swirling with pink and blue, and tipped it forward. The liquid splashed across Gracie's dress, seeping into the fabric in messy streaks. Rosie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Victoria's smirk returned, brittle and satisfied. "Maybe next time you'll remember your place," she said, her voice a velvet blade. Gracie stood still, the water dripping down her skirt, her dignity unbroken. She didn't retaliate, didn't defend. She simply met Victoria's gaze, calm, unwavering, and impossibly steady. For the first time, Victoria looked away. The sound of Rosie's sobs sliced through the hum of conversation drifting from the veranda. Julian turned instinctively, his glass halfway to his lips. The little girl came running across the patio, her curls flying, her small face blotched with tears. "Uncle Julian!" she cried, clutching his hand with trembling fingers. "Aunt Victoria hurt Gracie." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the room behind him fell into a stunned silence. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard, that a child's imagination had twisted something harmless. But one look at Rosie's tear-streaked cheeks told him otherwise. He was already moving before anyone could stop him. The guests exchanged glances as he strode across the garden, the tension trailing him like static. Beyond the hedge, he found Gracie kneeling by the flagstones, a towel in her hand, blotting at the spilled paint water. Her dress clung to her in damp patches, soft streaks of color bleeding into the fabric. She didn't look up when he arrived. "Rosie told me what happened," he said quietly. Gracie exhaled slowly. "She's upset," she murmured. "It's nothing, really. I should have—" "Don't do that," he interrupted, his tone sharper than intended. "Don't make excuses for her." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "Tell me the truth, Gracie." For a long moment, she said nothing. The breeze lifted a strand of hair across her cheek, and she tucked it away with careful grace. When she finally spoke, her words were calm, even. "She didn't like seeing me out here. Thought I was overstepping." She gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose I forgot my place." Julian's jaw tightened. "No," he said, his voice low. "She forgot hers." The words hung between them, heavier than anger. He watched her, the way she knelt quietly instead of crying, the way she refused to let humiliation twist into bitterness. There was something about her restraint that made his chest ache, a quiet strength he hadn't recognized until now. Victoria's laughter floated from the terrace, brittle and hollow. Julian turned his head toward the sound, his pulse steadying into something colder. Affection, once effortless, now felt foreign, a luxury he could no longer afford. He looked back at Gracie, her hands still moving, gentle and unbothered. "You shouldn't have to clean this up," he said. She met his gaze, and for a fleeting moment, neither of them looked away. Something unspoken passed between them, a shift, small but irrevocable. And from that moment on, nothing about the future felt certain. The evening air in the drawing room felt heavier than usual, thick with perfume and polite tension. Guests lounged with champagne flutes, murmuring about stock portfolios and charity galas, pretending not to notice the frost forming between Julian and Victoria. She stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, the other cradling her glass like a prop. Her laugh was light, effortless, but it rang false against the low hum of the room. "It's really quite absurd," she said, her tone breezy. "A child's story blown out of proportion. I adore Rosie, but she's imaginative. And the nanny? Well, bless her heart. She's always been a little dramatic." A few guests chuckled nervously, eager to follow her lead. Gracie's name lingered in the air like perfume, sweet but stifling. Julian, seated at the far end of the room, looked up slowly. "Dramatic?" he repeated, his tone quiet but laced with steel. Victoria smiled, unbothered. "She's clearly trying to make herself look noble." "I mean really, Julian, Do you think she would still be mopping floors if she didn't enjoy the attention? Her laugh was delicate, cruelly elegant. Julian set his glass down. The sound of crystal against wood echoed sharper than anyone expected. He rose, every inch of his composure measured and dangerous. "You think this is about attention?" he said, his voice low, the calm before thunder. The guests fell still. Victoria turned, still smiling, but her confidence wavered as he stepped closer. "You humiliated her," he continued, "in front of my niece, the same child you claim to love." "Julian," she began, her voice softening, tilting toward charm, "I was teaching boundaries. The staff needs to know." "She's not the staff," he cut in, his voice cracking through the silence. "She's not the help. She's family." The words landed like a verdict. The air changed. Every head in the room turned. Victoria blinked, her smile collapsing into disbelief. "Family?" she repeated, incredulous. "You're defending her?" Julian's expression didn't waver. "I'm defending decency." The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the quiet conviction behind every word. Victoria's cheeks flushed crimson, not from shame, but from humiliation. She looked around, searching for an ally, but none of the guests met her eyes. The room had turned. She let out a brittle laugh. "You'd risk everything we've built over a servant's feelings?" Julian's reply was soft, final. "If that's what you think we've built, then it was never worth keeping." No one spoke after that. Even the music from the next room seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of Victoria's breath catching, the slow, quiet sound of a pedestal cracking in two. By morning, the argument that had begun in the drawing room had already slipped past the mansion's walls. What was once a private fracture became a spectacle. Someone, a guest with a sharp phone camera and quicker curiosity, had caught the confrontation on video. By dawn, the clip had flooded social media. Julian's voice, calm but cutting, echoing across the internet. "She's not the help. She's family." The words, replayed millions of times, became a rallying cry. Underneath, comments poured in, not gossip, but admiration. That woman held her head high. Finally, someone said it. Grace under fire, literally. Gracie Harris's name trended not as a scandal, but as a symbol. Victoria, meanwhile, woke to a different kind of fame. Her face filled timelines under headlines like "Socialite humiliates employee" and "Loses everything in 30 seconds." The world that once adored her now dissected her with glee. Former collaborators unfollowed her. Sponsors pulled out. Her polished image cracked under the weight of 1,000 retweets and a single truth she couldn't control. The world had seen who she really was. Outside the young estate, cameras gathered like vultures. Reporters leaned against the wrought iron gates, calling out questions. "Mr. Young, is it true the engagement is off? Miss Harris, how does it feel to be the nation's sweetheart?" The only response was silence. Julian's black SUV glided past without slowing. Gracie slipped through the back entrance as she always did, head down, posture calm, as though nothing had changed. Inside, the house had fallen into a strange quiet. The staff moved with a new kind of reverence around her, offering soft smiles, small gestures of respect. Gracie accepted none of it. She still rose before dawn, still packed Rosie's lunches, still read bedtime stories in the same warm tone. When a reporter slipped a note into the kitchen asking for a statement, she folded it once and set it aside. "No comment," she told the chef gently. "Some things speak for themselves." Julian watched her from his office window more than once that week. The way she moved through the chaos as though she existed in a calmer universe. There was no anger in her, no need to defend herself. She simply carried on, her quiet strength louder than any headline. At the end of the week, the mansion lights dimmed early. Outside, flashbulbs still flared against the gates, hungry for drama. Inside, Gracie read Rosie to sleep. Her voice was steady, her smile small but real. Let them talk, she thought. She didn't need the world to believe her story. The truth had already spoken, and it had chosen dignity. The press conference was supposed to last 15 minutes. It stretched into history. The marble atrium of the Young Foundation headquarters gleamed beneath white light as journalists packed in shoulder to shoulder, microphones poised, whispers buzzing like electricity. Julian stepped to the podium alone. No entourage, no fiancée at his side. His navy suit was immaculate, but his expression carried something stripped of polish, the kind of quiet conviction that didn't need rehearsal. The room fell still when he looked up. Cameras clicked. Flashbulbs flared. He let the noise settle before he spoke. Over the past week, he began, his voice even but steady, a private moment in my home became a public conversation. I've watched as the story was twisted, debated, and sensationalized. But what matters isn't the gossip, it's the truth. He paused, meeting the eyes of the crowd. A woman in my household was humiliated for doing her job with grace. Her name is Gracie Harris, and she handled cruelty with more dignity than most of us handle comfort. The murmurs rippled. Some reporters lowered their pens, startled by his candor. I've built companies, chaired boards, made money, he continued, his voice gaining strength. But I've also learned that wealth means nothing if it costs you your humanity. If the world has to learn that lesson through me, so be it. His words cut clean, simple, undeniable. He straightened, his tone firm. As of today, my engagement to Victoria Carlisle is over. The crowd erupted, questions flying, flashes blinding, but Julian didn't flinch. I wish her well, he added quietly, but I will not build a life on arrogance disguised as grace. Not when I've seen what real grace looks like. At the edge of the stage, Victoria froze, her face caught between disbelief and fury. She hadn't expected him to go through with it. She'd arrived intending to stand beside him, ready to perform damage control, perhaps spin a narrative of unity. Instead, she stood alone as he reclaimed the microphone and the moral high ground. Cameras turned toward her, capturing the moment the facade cracked. Her heels clicked sharply as she turned and stormed out, her exit swallowed by the sound of applause rising in the room. Julian lingered at the podium, not as a man undone by scandal, but as one remade by truth. Outside, reporters would call it a breakup. Inside, he knew it was something else entirely. A declaration that character, not wealth, would define the empire he rebuilt from here on. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, soft and forgiving, washing the marble counters in shades of honey. The house, once echoing with footsteps and hushed speculation, was silent now. No reporters at the gate, no whispers behind doors, just the low hum of the kettle and the rhythmic clink of Gracie's spoon stirring Rosie's oatmeal. The child sat at the table in her pajamas, humming to herself, crayons scattered like confetti beside her bowl. Every so often she looked up at Gracie, eyes full of that uncomplicated trust only children can give. "Is everything better now?" she asked. Gracie smiled, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. "Better enough," she said. Julian appeared in the doorway, his presence quieter than usual. He wasn't the public man today, not the heir or the businessman, just a man stripped of performance. He lingered there for a moment, watching the scene. Gracie bent over the stove, sunlight haloing her curls, Rosie's laughter brightening the room. For the first time in weeks, the air felt real. "You didn't have to come down," Gracie said, glancing over her shoulder. "We've got everything handled." "I know," Julian replied, his voice low, warm. "I just wanted to see for myself." He hesitated before stepping closer, the faintest trace of exhaustion in his eyes. "You didn't deserve any of it." Gracie looked at him fully then, her gaze steady, unguarded. "I didn't need defending," she said softly. "Just understanding." Her tone wasn't proud, just truthful, the kind of truth that didn't need to be explained. Julian exhaled, nodding. "You have both," he said. For a moment, the world felt suspended between them. No cameras, no noise, just the quiet pulse of morning, the scent of toast, the distant sound of birds outside, the child's quiet humming. Rosie giggled, breaking the silence. "Uncle Julian, you're standing like a statue." He smiled faintly, reaching down to ruffle her hair before meeting Gracie's eyes once more. "You make this house feel alive again," he said. She didn't answer right away. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes glimmered with something deeper, gratitude maybe, or the quiet strength of someone who's been seen at last. When Julian finally left the room, the door whispered shut behind him. Gracie turned back to the stove, her heart steady. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time it no longer frightened her. Peace, she realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it simply breathed. The ribbon fluttered to the ground, the sound of applause, soft but sincere. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the converted community hall, where bright murals now colored the once gray walls. Gracie stood at the center, her palms clasped together, eyes shimmering with quiet disbelief. The sign above the entrance read, "The Harris Foundation for Early Learning." It wasn't grand or opulent, but it was hers, a dream born not from ambition, but from compassion. Children ran laughing between tables stacked with books and crayons, their voices filling the space with the kind of joy money couldn't manufacture. The funding had come anonymously, though no one believed that for a second. Julian stood near the back of the room, away from the cameras, his hands in his pockets, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. He wasn't there for recognition, and he made that clear. "This is your work," he'd told her when she tried to thank him. "I just opened a few doors." He meant it. For all the noise the world had made about them, the scandal, the moral spectacle, the speculation, this moment belonged entirely to her. Gracie moved through the small crowd of volunteers, greeting each one by name, her presence grounding, her joy understated. When the speeches ended and the reporters packed up their cameras, she sank onto a rug in the center of the room surrounded by a circle of children. They waited expectantly, their faces turned toward her, eyes wide. She opened a storybook and began to read, her voice steady, soothing, alive. The children leaned closer, some resting their heads against her arm, completely entranced. From the corner, Julian watched her, not with possession or longing, but with respect. He saw the same calm strength that had silenced a ballroom and outlasted humiliation, the same grace that had taught him what real integrity looked like. When their eyes met across the room, she gave him a small nod, as if to say thank you, not for saving her, but for seeing her. Outside, the late afternoon sun spilled through the windows, painting gold over everything it touched. The camera would linger there, framing her voice as it rose and fell like a quiet hymn. Around her, the children laughed softly, safe and whole. And in that stillness, the world seemed to exhale, a story closing, but a life opening wide. Because sometimes the greatest love story isn't about romance at all. It's about respect. If this story moved you, share it. Somewhere, a woman like Gracie is being judged for her skin, her job, or her quiet strength. And she needs to be reminded that she's not invisible. That grace can shake empires. That the truth always finds its voice, even in silence. Comment below if you've ever been treated like you didn't belong and proved you were the very reason the room existed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.